how do religions communicate? They communicate through stories. So you're going to hear 3 stories today, and everything that I say is in a script, and the stories are in a packet. So at the end of the session today, you'll walk away with a packet of everything I say and the stories that I tell. So don't even need to take notes. It's all being done for you. This is such a delight and an honor to meet you. I love teaching, but I'm sort of tired of that 18 to 20-year-old window at times. It's nice to actually engage with dialogue with grown-ups. So it's lovely to see you. I thought I would start by introducing myself and tell you where I'm coming from, because religion is so loaded as a subject that sometimes when you say something, people don't know how to take it. So I started my undergraduate work at the Honors College at Roanoke College, and I was raised an Episcopalian. And while I was at Roanoke College, down near Roanoke, Virginia, it's a Lutheran school, and I converted to Lutheranism down there, which is maybe 1 centimeter away theologically from Episcopalianism. And so I did comparative religions down there. How are religions alike, and how are they different? And we're going to talk about that a little today. How are they alike, and how are they different? And then I went to do a Rotary International Fellowship at the University of Durham in England. And every morning for 3 hours in my little Harry Potter robe, I translated the New Testament from Greek for 3 hours every morning, the entire year, thinking, haven't they done this already? Why am I doing this? Greek. The reason for that is you get to see the actual words of translation and the magic of the words. When I got that fellowship, my mother said to me, "You're going to translate the New Testament from Greek? I hope you don't lose your faith." Isn't that interesting? If we look at the constructed nature of religion or of sacred texts, will we lose our faith? Will religion lose its legitimacy? So that was a very interesting question. But I decided at the University of Durham that I am not a convergent thinker. I was invited to pick one Greek verb and build my career on it. And I said, I think I can't do that. I would be so bored within 5 years. So I started a PhD at Stanford in American religious thought, because I love looking at American religious phenomena. And I figured that is more my thing. Content-wise, I was happier there, but the department I was in, the words we would use now would be something like toxic, sexual harassers, power players, an amazing variety of faculty members who exploited the graduate students, either for work or unappreciated service, or just sort of like a well-stocked pond for sexual prey. And it was not a good place to be. All those people have retired or passed on now, so it's a different place, just wanted to say that. But I realized that I like the content, but the content of American religious thought was approached historically. So you're talking another short window, 1600s to now. Again, convergent thinking. And I'm a real divergent thinker. I like throwing a lot of balls up in the air and playing among them. So I'm a divergent thinker. So I went over to Berkeley and I said, "How do you treat people here?" And they said, "You must be from Stanford." And I started a PhD there in the sociology of religion. And that's my world. That's my field. It's sociology, so it's a methodology. And I can apply it to any phenomena that passes my way. So I started my dissertation was on why do people leave Protestant congregations? And I interviewed 100 Protestants, and it was fascinating. None of them left for theological reasons. It was all the pastor didn't minister to me when my dad died. It was all human pain reasons, which I found fascinating. But they were doing perfectly fine without church. They were going off and doing their own thing, using maybe some Buddhist meditation, mindfulness. They had crafted their own spiritual journey outside church. And so my first academic paper was called Congregations of One, Individual Religion Outside Church. And so from there, I went to studying the New Age. And I got in contact with a lot of New Age groups. I participated, for example, in neo-pagan Wiccan ceremonies of drawing down the moon. They have full moon ceremonies when the moon is full, and they worship Skyclad. I did not join them. What does Skyclad mean, do you think? Skyclad. What do you think that means? Clad only with the sky. They're naked. I'm watching. I'm learning. So they're out in the woods, full moon, drawing down the power of the moon and pushing it out to everybody in the circle. So I participated in neo-shaman workshops, neo-pagan Wiccanism, found that fascinating, taught classes in New Age religion, like where are they pulling from, where are they getting their resources. From that, I went the opposite way into their critics, which would be fundamentalist Christianity. And I had 5 years interviewing fundamentalists. That was very interesting. There was a conference in 1993 called Reimagining. I don't know if anyone has heard of that here. It was a Protestant conference where they were reimagining religion, reimagining God. And they did some things that upset, in particular, the Presbyterian denomination. And so the number 2 in the Presbyterian denomination, Marianne Lundy, was fired for helping organize that conference through the National Council of Churches. So I asked the question, why do people care? If 2,000 people get together in a conference ballroom in Minneapolis to talk about reimagining prayer, reimagining liturgy, reimagining interpretive methods for scripture, why do people care? To care to the degree where they gave Marianne Lundy death threats through the mail. Now, here's a piece of advice. Don't ever do that. Don't give a death threat through the mail. It's a felony. The FBI gets involved. It's not just local police, it's the FBI. And they hunt you down if you give a death threat through the mail. So you may think it, but don't ever do that. They eventually found the people that had sent her death threats through the mail. But she lost her job for organizing this. Was she tasked to organize this by her boss? Yes. So it's why do people care to that level of visceral engagement? I found that fascinating. My next research project was just a very short one, looking at the stakeholders in positions on separation of church and state. For example, the Hobby Lobby decision. Hobby Lobby, the craft store that wanted an exemption from the Affordable Care Act. The Masterpiece Cake Shop, Jack Phillips, I interviewed him. He's the Colorado baker that didn't want to bake a cake for a gay wedding. He actually offered to bake the cake. He just didn't want to decorate it. That was his art form, he said. Barronelle Stutzman of Orleans Flowers in Washington State didn't want to create wedding floral designs for friends of hers, a gay couple that had been buying flowers for her for 10 years. She said, here's the phone numbers of all the florists in the area that will. I will even sell them at a discount the flowers. I just don't support gay weddings. What do we do with those people? You know, what do we do with them? You know what the Constitution does with them? Protects them. And that's that tough thing about the United States of America is our Constitution has protections for religious freedom, protections for religious, for self-expression, protections for assembly. So what do we do with those? Where they're willing to take the hit, they're willing to go into bankruptcy. Barronelle Stutzman of Orleans Flowers is in bankruptcy with her legal fees. What do we do with those people? Why do they care so deeply? And my most recent one is cults. Ever since I was in the 1980s and 90s, have been fascinated by cults. There are a lot of cults around Berkeley when I was at Berkeley for 4 years. Why do people join something so seemingly destructive to us on the outside? And so I've interviewed a lot of cult members, and those gurus that are willing to be interviewed, I interviewed them. And so now I teach a course at Georgetown called Cults, Extremist Religion and the Search for Meaning. So each one of my research projects has been realized into a course at Georgetown or an article. So there's I think this is a great job. I think being a professor, you get that interior, introverted side of intellectual engagement, keep yourself alive intellectually, and then you can funnel that back into your teaching and teach others about that, and then draw questions from students that have you intellectually engaged, and then you go do research on that. So just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from, I'm an active Lutheran now, but I use Buddhist meditation mindfulness practice because I think for me that is the perfect medicine for my particular psychological conditions, which hover in the anxiety, depression kind of categories. So let's talk about religious pluralism. It's our first section. And what I thought I would do is tell a story for each section, and then mine that story for what the point of the story is within the religion. And then we have conversation about that. And your contributions are appreciated, your comments and feedback. And then we'll move on to section 2. And then we'll close with section 3, its own story and its own mining of that story for meaning. So let's talk about religious pluralism. It's one of the hottest topics today and something that we think we do well in the United States. And I would say we probably do that well. But there are some areas for growth, I think, in religious pluralism. Now, I know you've heard this story before, but I want to tell it to you now as it is appropriated from Hinduism. This is a story from Hinduism. So listen for the end, how the religion thinks, what the religion thinks the point of the story is. This is called The Blind Men and the Elephant. How many people have heard that story before? Once upon a time. That's a great way to start, isn't it? Once upon a time, there lived 6 blind men in a village. One day, the villagers told them, "Hey, there's an elephant in the village today." They had no idea what an elephant was, and they decided, even though we would not be able to see it, let's go and feel it anyway. So all of them went where the elephant was. Every one of them touched the elephant. "Hey, The elephant is like a pillar, said the first man who touched the elephant's leg. Oh no, the elephant is like a rope, said the second man who touched the elephant's tail. No, it's like a thick branch of a tree, said the third man who touched the trunk of the elephant. It's like a big hand of a fan, said the fourth man who touched the ear of the elephant. It's like a huge wall, said the fifth man who touched the belly of the elephant. It's like a solid pipe, I think, said the sixth man who touched the tusk of the elephant. They began to argue about the elephant, and every one of them insisted he was right. It looked like they were getting agitated. So a wise man who was passing by stopped when he saw this. He asked them, "What is the matter?" They said, "We can't agree as to what the elephant is like." The wise men said, "You know, you are all right. Your experience is different, and thus your reality is different, and thus your truth is different. But you all have a piece of the truth." I'm going to say that again. The wise men said, "You are all right. Your experience is different, and thus your reality is different, and thus your truth is different. But you all have a piece of the truth." So the moral of this story within the Hindu context is, look for the truth in the other's reality as well as the partiality of the truth in your own. Look for the truth in the other's reality as well as the partiality of the truth in your own. So we all have a piece of the truth. I'm not saying give up your truth or give up your reality, but just see the boundaries of it. The boundaries of it. So that story is in the service of the lesson that religious systems contain the human values of every culture. You think about that a minute. Every culture has human values, and they get encoded in this dynamic between the culture and the religion, the questions of that particular age and the religion. So they're all creating each other's reality, even the reality of the religion. The title of this talk is External Differences, Internal Similarities. Are religions similar? Well, I can give you two religions that are very similar. They have mutual truths, Buddhism and Christianity. Both of them work on loving kindness. Christianity is supposed to be about unconditional love. Both religions encourage their believers to work on themselves, to be better, less sinful, more enlightened. So they look superficially alike. The difference, however, is core to their teaching. Buddhism says, in fact, the Buddha's last words were, work out your own enlightenment. Work it out. Christianity says you can't work it out. You're enmeshed in brokenness, the human condition, sin. You need a Messiah. The Messiah has come. Rise up and walk. Those are pretty different. Work it out for yourself. Ain't no Messiah around. Or you can't work it out. You need this Messiah. Now, one of the lessons of the elephant story and the comparison of Buddhism and Christianity is that when you're talking about religious pluralism, note that there are truths in the other person's religion, but don't try to squish and smush them all together. Note the real differences and allow the differences to be respected and real. So religious pluralism is best communicated not with a singular emphasis on similarities. Religious pluralism is best communicated when the differences are present and respected as well. So I'm going to stop here. Take questions, comments, contributions.
Something, I teach communication here, and something actually that was just in the class I taught yesterday was about remembering. And when we remember what we perceive. So this made me think of that is your reality of anything, but in this case, what you remember is what you perceived to remember and how you perceived that, and that's your reality. And I think that ties in really well to the parable you told.
Excellent comment about remembering and how what we remember is what we perceive. In a sense, that is our reality, and we build our reality on that. But it's also why I think first-person witness testimony, sometimes we don't remember accurately. This weekend, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I went to my high school reunion. My husband is just astonished because high school, I don't know if you've seen the Mean Girls movie. It was so traumatizing for me. I moved from Chicago to a small town in Virginia, and at the age of 15 and a half, almost 16. Bad time to be moving, bad place to be moving. So, I mean, that's part of my story, how abusive high school was, how mean they were to me, and how I developed social skills to overcome my wounds. I mean, that's my narrative. And so I see these same people that hurt me so deeply decades ago being so charming and, oh, I can't wait to see you, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, did I imagine what you said when you were 17 years old? Do they remember what they said when they were 17 years old? No. So I had a lot of healing happen this weekend, healing of that perception, healing of those memories. Doesn't mean they didn't happen. I got great things out of them. So I guess I should have been going around saying, thank you, thank you. But, you know, it's tough. That doesn't mean the wounds weren't there and that I don't still have trouble walking into like cafeterias or public spaces where I don't know anybody, and what if they don't offer for me to sit with them, or what if I'm left out? I still have that. Those thoughts come. And now I am not hooked by the thought, but I can see that thought crossing my mind. This is mindfulness training. I know how anxious I am by when that tape starts. What if nobody wants me to sit with them? You know, how old am I that I'm still having that thought? So, memories, remembering our perceptions. Anybody else? Comments? Yeah.
Something that just kind of came to me because my son talks to me about this all the time. He's very into psychology and philosophy thing, and he talks to me about Buddhism quite often, which, you know, I'm a Catholic. So in regards to what you said, the services that were denied based on sexual orientation, that example you gave us earlier with the cake and the flowers.
Oh, yeah.
So do you think that religious freedom is kind of justifying the way for discrimination, or are we hiding behind the religious freedom to be able to do these acts against other people? And what do you...
Excellent question. We're in a very hyper-politicized age, and I promise you, no political comments from me today. However, the rock bottom understanding of religious freedom in the United States is there is a guaranteed right in the Constitution for your conscience, for your religious freedom. I'll give you an example. U.S. v. Ballard in 1944. The Supreme Court was presented with the case of a guy named Guy Ballard, and he healed people through the mails. And he was getting more and more money, and sometimes it worked. His praying for them worked, sometimes it didn't. And the people who it didn't work sued him, and as he was a fraud. And so that case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, you know, say he's a fraud, was the defendant's family, the family of the guy that died, because the Guy Ballard's praying didn't work. And, you know, the Supreme Court, 1944, in the Ballard decision said, nope, we're not going to say he's a fraud. We're not in that business. Everything is caveat emptor, buyer beware. So we're not going to put constraints on religious freedom. That's not our role. So they validated Ballard's right to do that, and our right to be critically thinking about that. And if we lose our money, we lose our money in the marketplace of ideas. A lesson we just bought, the Supreme Court said. So do I think people can be genuinely in their conscience and backed up by certain portions of Scripture, and it is in there, against homosexuality? Yes. Do I think they can have honest, sincere conscience on that? Yes. Do I think it also gets politicized? And do I think that, I won't go into the long story about Employment Division v. Smith, although it's tempting. I think it's very expensive to bring a religious freedom defense case now. And because of that, the florist and the baker, there are boutique law firms that will take their cases on. And they are funded solely by donors. And so they are the ones who do a lot of the public relations politicizing of, look how great we just did defending this guy or this gal, and to take in more money. So do I think it is possible that they are sincere? Yes. But do I also think they're being used in the service of a greater culture war? Definitely. Yeah.
Can I just as a follow-up to that, because that particular case in Colorado, I'm always thinking about that. And while I'm one of those people, I can definitely empathize with the couple for being frustrated at here's another chance for somebody who's violating my rights. But I can also empathize with the baker as a fellow creator, because somebody who considers myself a creator, wanting to make sure that my work is reflective of my beliefs and values. And what disturbs me most about that situation is that how do we get to the point where we can actually still have a conversation and not leave out storming and end up all the way at the Supreme Court? They're two human beings who have different beliefs and see different sides of the situation, can still have a conversation and not leave angry, but leave acknowledging each other's beliefs, but not get to the point where it's escalated to that level. And I think that's the thing that I struggle with when I see these incidents happening over and over again.
So agree.
How can we get out of that?
Yeah, because people feel disrespected. Not that I'm advocating for Jack Phillips, the baker, of Masterpiece Cake Shop in Lakewood, Colorado, but I interviewed him, and was he able to say how deeply he respects that couple? He knew them. Baronelle Stutzman knew her couple for 10 years, wanted to accommodate them in every possible way except for them being sort of compliant with something they honestly don't believe in. So their voices, we respect the couple. We're not anti-gay. We just don't, how about they have a civil union, they say. Their voice is respectful, but his experience is discriminatory. And so what I want to hear from Baronelle and Jack is, do you get how discriminatory you may sound? You're talking the language of respect, but it's being experienced as discriminatory. So I think there are deeper levels we can go where people don't storm out of the room because they are deeply listened to, but you're sort of pressing on them gently to say, here's how you are being experienced. I know you're well-intentioned. I know this is what you're saying, but this is what they're hearing. Questions, comments?
I want to comment on what's the word we use, the Messiah, right? The Messiah. So Christians have one, other religions have one. And a bunch of us just went to Japan this May, and someone said, who was in Japan? Well, Angela was in it. And someone said, we did some meditation with this monk and everything, and someone said, you know, Buddhism doesn't tell you what to believe. And I'd never heard it put that way before. I thought, well, what kind of religion is that? What does it tell you, you know? What does it do for you? And I mean, I asked politely, and the answer was, it tells you how to be, how to exist. Totally foreign to my way of thinking, you know, up until maybe 5 years ago or something. And it's hard to even group it along with other religions because of that. So I'm fascinated by it, and I'm fascinated by the fact that you are Lutheran and also practice Buddhism, and they're not irreconcilable.
Rita is asking the question that surfaced after a trip they took to Japan and meditated with a monk. And does Buddhism, that became the question, you know, have a core body of teachings that you sort of have to believe in? And the response was, it's just be. I think on a philosophical level, I think that's true. But I also think that if you start attending a Buddhist temple, there are, you know, specific times for the service to begin, and, you know, specific things that you would be taught, and there would be a presentation or a talk. We wouldn't call it a sermon, but there would be doctrinal content in there. So I understand that people think it's not a religion, it's a way of life. I hear that all the time. But it's a religion. There are temples. There are people who go. You have to give offerings to pay for the maintenance of the temple and the support of the monks. It's a functioning system. But yes, on top of that, we can extract the religiosity from it and look at the philosophy of it. And I think on that level is what people are talking about. It's not a religion. It's a way of life. It's a tough way of life just to be, right? Because there's always those thoughts. The Buddha taught to sort of drop below that surface of agitated water and just to be present. But that's where you're most vulnerable. And that's where your heart is open, and what if somebody doesn't invite you to sit with them at lunch, you know? Our most vulnerable fears come out, and all the stuff we're worried about is in the present moment. And we don't want to look at that, so we agitate our own water. We do it to ourselves. Keeps us safe from thinking scary thoughts, I think. Section 2, truth. That's one of the toughest issues in religion. You know, there are over like 400 religions, each one of them saying they have the truth, and yet they contradict each other. So which one is true? So I really want us to think about what is truth, and how do we know, and what is truth? Here's a story that communicates about truth. Once upon a time, there was a Tibetan mother who was a devout Buddhist and who had a son who traveled to India regularly on business. Before a trip the son was going to take to India, His mother had heard that pieces of the Buddha were available for sale. Hundreds of years previously, the Buddha had been cremated, and pieces of his body, his teeth, bits of his bone, were sent all over the world to be the seed of new temples. She asked her son with great seriousness if he would commit to bringing her back a piece of the Buddha. The son said, "Oh, right, I'll work on that." But she said, "No, please don't take this casually. This means the world to me. Commit or don't. I understand either way, but please take this seriously." And so he thought about it. How hard would it be to obtain a piece of the Buddha? So he bowed deeply to her and said, "Mother, I will bring you a piece of the Buddha." So many weeks passed. The son returned from his trip to India, and as he was walking up the path to the village to visit her at her small home, he stopped in the middle of the path as he realized he had forgotten to bring her a piece of the Buddha. Shame and consternation overtook him, and he began to think, it wouldn't be good to violate his oath to her. And so he quickly looked around for something that he could give her. Over by the side of the road, he saw a dead dog rotting. He went up to the dog carcass, swatted the flies away, lifted up the dog's mouth, and broke off a tooth of the dog. Rinsing it off in a nearby mud puddle, he wrapped it in his white silk handkerchief and started up the path again. When he reached her home, his mother bowed to him, and he bowed back. She served him tea, anticipation on her face. He remained neutral. At last, his mother could contain herself no longer and said, "Well, son?" He bowed again, reached into his pocket, and kneeling down with great ceremony, he opened the white silk handkerchief to her. "The Buddha's tooth," he said. She bowed, and with great ceremony, took the sacred gift from him, turned and slowly placed the tooth on her altar, and began to pray. The room filled with deep and sincere reverence. She was able to generate such love in that room as she prayed to the tooth for hours in gratitude and love. She generated so much love, devotion, and compassion because of her belief in the Buddha's tooth that she achieved enlightenment in that lifetime. After her death, the villagers made a temple where her home had stood. Does it make a difference that that was not the Buddha's tooth? Does it make a difference? What is truth in that scenario? Truth is love. Truth is devotion. At the core of that is an irrelevancy about the truth of the tooth of the Buddha. I'll give you another example. Bruges, Belgium. Some years ago, I was visiting Bruges with a deeply devoted Catholic friend, and we were just there for a getaway weekend. Zelma Ferreira Braganza is her name. And we didn't realize, it was May, but we didn't realize it was the ceremony of the Holy Blood, that the church in Bruges, Belgium, had what they believed was some of Jesus's blood on a piece of fabric, and they encased it in a crystal tube that they embedded in a stunning silver altar. The altar was maybe 9 feet long and 12 feet high of carved silver, and up in the top they put this crystal tube of a piece of linen cloth with Jesus' blood on it. And once a year, they opened it for display and then carried it around the streets in a procession. We went, my friend Zelma and I went, and we sat and we watched this phenomenon of everybody, lines 3 hours long around the city to see this, and how devout the people were, and how holy, the holiness that this relic brought forth from them. It altered my whole weekend with her. I mean, we were there to gossip about our husbands, or gritch about our husbands and gossip about our children. How do you do any of that after you've seen this phenomenon? And so we went to dinner that night, and she being a very devout Catholic, I didn't want to like step on anything if this was now a truth for her. But I said to her, well, what are your reflections on what we've just seen? And she said, could that possibly be Jesus' blood? And I said, does it make a difference? Does it make a difference? All those people, thousands of people, did they have a good day that day? Did they get fed? Did they have a little lightness to their load of existential suffering? Maybe their child's just been diagnosed with leukemia, or their husband beats them, or they themselves have just had an affair. They're carrying a burden. Was that lightened that day? Now, I said to my friend Zelma, can I make the case that that is Jesus' blood? I can make that case. After Jesus' death, any object that had touched his body, just like any object that touches the Buddha's body or Muhammad's body, is seen to be a sacred object. In anthropological terms, it's called mana, M-A-N-A, sort of a spirit hovers or within the object. So could there have been a piece of fabric that had touched Jesus's bloody body that last day of his life, and that was secreted away and passed down from generation to generation, and eventually was sold by a family member that didn't care about it anymore? I don't know if you've experienced that in your family. Some great antique from great aunt Margaret will come down in the family, and you end up with it, and you don't care about that, or great aunt Margaret, and you sell it. And I can make that case of the reliquary industry over thousands of years, and how the churches used to buy relics, and they would buy and trade. If they were on the ascendancy, they were getting wealthier and wealthier in that specific diocese, they used to buy more relics. And they would use the relics to attract people who would pay to see the relic, and so they made money off of these. I could make that case. I could make the case it's not Jesus' blood too. But does it make a difference? So the point of the Buddha's tooth story is, what kinds of truth is religion attempting to offer people, and what kinds of truth does science and mathematics give people? It's different kinds of truth. And I think we go awry when we try to conflate them. Luther, in particular, was like, anybody who takes the Bible as literal fact is going to have their mind bent, because the Bible contradicts itself. It's the scripture of two different religions, Judaism and Christianity. But there's so much truth in there. You don't undermine it by saying, okay, it was written over thousands of years by 50 different people. Looking at the constructed nature of texts, or the constructed nature of religious systems, doesn't undermine their truth. Like my mother was afraid when I was going to go translate the New Testament into English, that I would lose my faith if I saw the constructed nature of the texts. Well, sure, it's constructed. I mean, it's human language, right? That's why there's the text that's in Pali and the text that's in Sanskrit and the text that's in Arabic and the text. It's human language, it's human experience. A revelation occurs if you're a believer, and it's filtered through all these lenses. So my students in the cults course, I want to tell you a question that they ask me all the time. And here's the question. When I start teaching that class, I always wait for the question. Here's the question. Professor, what's the difference between a cult, what wackos believe, and a religion, the true, historical, proven through time tradition I believe in? What's the difference between a cult and what I believe in? Because it gets very ouchy when you start looking at, what is the definition of a cult? Well, it might match what you believe in. It might have a charismatic leader. It might have an authoritarian teaching. If you go down each one of the criteria and characteristics, you might be in a cult. And they're terrified to think that. And so I realize as I'm teaching the cults course to be very, very gentle. And I spend the first 2 weeks, I used to spend it a little more aggressively, but now I realize the anxiety in the room is its own manifestation. They are so anxious about that question. And I have to bring in, we have the Reverend Brian Oskvig is one of our chaplains on campus. He's a Protestant chaplain, but he wears a Roman collar, black suit, black shirt with a white, like chiclet piece in front. And he is our sort of unofficial, but now official, monitor of religious activity on campus. And if there is a group that is of concern to him, that they put up flyers around campus, and he takes a photo of the flyer and he shows up for their meeting, and he says, tell me about who you are and where's your headquarters and who's your guru. And he sort of is our unofficial cult buster on campus. And I love Bryant. I know him, he teaches in the theology department as well. And so that first week of class, I will bring Brian in and he will say to the students, I got your back. There is cult activity on every college campus. There have been cults at Georgetown. We had a famous woman, Jenny Hunter, you could Google her. She's an article in the Washington Post about her. She went to a Bible study in the ICC building, room 225. I'm going to a meeting there at 3 o'clock tomorrow. Same room, 225, Intercultural Center building. And she went to a Bible study. And it wasn't a Bible study. It was a cult-like group, Kip McKean's International Church of Christ. It's not the Church of Christ. It's the International Church of Christ. You could Google it. And she got sucked into this cult. And she quit Georgetown, and she was forced into a marriage in that group. And they moved her, of all places, to Stanford to be a recruiter for the International Church of Christ. She had 2 children. Finally was able to leave the group. Her parents hired a deprogrammer, I guess. He sort of somebody that sort of, I won't say kidnaps you, but does an intervention. And she lives in Arlington now with her kids. So if that's in the Washington Post, and it was your campus, and it's your building, and it's where you go with your international relations class, anxiety is in the room. So how do we tell the difference between that truth, toxic truth, and that truth, maybe less toxic truth? I bring in Brian Oskvig, and he walks us through his process of ascertaining, is this group somebody we want on campus, or is it not? He asks them to affiliate with our campus ministry office. Often that alone will be enough to say, they'll say, okay, no thank you, I'm not going to be analyzed or inspected by you, I'll go to another campus. But he's, I think, stopped the International Church of Christ on campus and 2 other groups on campus. One of them was affiliated with the Unification Church. Do you remember the Unification Church from the 70s, Reverend Sun Nguyen Moon? And they are still recruiting. So it's good to ask about truth. It's good to keep our minds interrogating. One of the things I want to close this section with is this acronym BIMP. Belonging, identity, meaning, and purpose. That's what a religion, that's what people are looking for. If a religion can't provide those things, belonging, identity, meaning, and purpose, the religion is going to die off, and it's like we don't worship Thor anymore, or Athena. There are dead religions, and they're dead because they don't answer our questions anymore. Religions come, they find legitimacy, they grow. Religions can't, they just sort of die off, they wither. And if they can't deliver BIMP, belonging, identity, meaning, and purpose, they're not legitimate. So I would argue that communicating religious values through religion on the issue of truth means you have to leave that issue open. Students will say, what's the difference between what the Wackos believe and what I believe? I make them figure that out for themselves. I give them definitions of religion. I give them a handout with how religions work, which can be more coercive over here and less coercive. And then I make them figure that out for themselves. They have to write a paper. Is Scientology a cult? And they do their own research on Scientology. We cover it in class. But they have to do an argument paper. And it doesn't necessarily need to be what they personally believe about Scientology, but how can they argue? Sometimes if they think it's a cult, it's good to intellectually argue that it's not, just to get that muscle working of building an argument. So, truth, comments, questions, contributions. Yeah.
There is some religions that began as a cult. Yes?
Mm-hmm. A cult-like group. Mm-hmm. Yeah, to be honest, I don't use the word cult. It's a word that is a shorthand for a group that is probably coercive. But I will never, when reporters call me or journalists investigating a group, they will say, is such and such a group a cult? And I will never answer that question. I'll send them definitions and dynamics. But I will say cult-like group, or a group that's not mentally healthy, or after the Branch Davidian issue in Waco, Texas, and that word was used as such a deviance amplification method by the FBI, I'm very careful not to call a group a cult. Yeah.
I don't know whether this was your intended meaning, but when you were talking about cult or cult-like groups, like the Wackos believe that, and then there's the other, are you in any way implying that religions, like legit religions, don't have Wackos? Because I personally disagree.
What a great question. Oh, I agree. There are wackos everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you didn't mean to exclude the Wackos?
No, I am not intolerant of wackos.
Okay.
Yeah. No, in every, I mean, even my own congregation, which I will remain anonymous, yeah, we have people along a political spectrum or a theological spectrum. It's just amazing how people will hear the same message on Sunday and have two very different understandings of that. It gets back to perceptions and how we experience things. Yeah. That's a great question. Yeah.
So just a side comment. So I went to Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, and while I was there, I did have a cult try to recruit me. I think it was the one that you're talking about, the international. And I was just walking around campus, and someone came up to me and started making small talk, this or that. And then I looked into it and found that they were targeting international students, people who didn't have anybody or didn't have community and so on, and that they would basically start harassing them. So, they would go and knock on their door at all hours, and, just do things that really, where they felt they couldn't get away or, did feel coerced into it. So I did, my friend and I, we did contact the administration and try to raise awareness about it, but it was a problem.
And that comment was a story about an experience of Kitten Keene's International Church of Christ in Northampton, Massachusetts, and needing to contact a administration official after being harassed by a recruiter. They look for the lonely and isolated. And if you're sitting alone in a cafeteria, if you're downtrodden, that's what they look for, is that kind of prey. And then they try to convince you that what you need, belonging, identity, meaning, and purpose, is what they can offer you. But at what cost? It's a high cost. It's what's called a high demand group in the psychology of religion. They demand a lot of your thinking process, your ability to critically engage. They shut you down and punish you. They withhold. If you're interested, I have a wonderful handout by this guy named Michael Bluejay. I wish he would change his last name because he has such great things to say, and it's legitimate, good content, but his last name is Bluejay. But he says that they they interview you and try to figure out what the prize is. What do you want? And then they offer the prize, and they say, this is the cost of the prize. And then they sort of, you want the prize, you reach for the prize, and then the cost is higher than originally displayed to you. And it's very, very hard because you invest years in these groups. And what I would like to do is be an exit counselor, meaning work with people to say, okay, you think that's a cult now, but really let's redeem that suffering. Let's make it about redemptive suffering. What did you gain? You got something out of that. It's not all loss. What did you learn about yourself? How can you turn that into knowledge moving forward? How can you be stronger, more mature, more critically engaged in the years ahead? There are ways of taking that suffering and making it, building resilience. Yeah, Rita.
So we have a lot of Ethiopian students on my campus in the Tacoma Park, and my son is Ethiopian, and so I'm always sort of listening very closely to the talk that happens on campus. And one story I keep hearing over and over again is the divisions that are created within families. Ever since the evangelicals started going to Africa, and it's not just Ethiopia, it's other countries also. So the countries are Ethiopians are Orthodox. And what's been happening is that, members of one family will get converted to Protestantism of some kind, and the others feel that they've lost something very precious, that their culture is losing something very precious, their religion is being threatened. So the evangelicals are being perceived in many ways as these cult figures who come and take your people away, brainwash them and take them away. And so there are family members who don't talk to each other. And they just feel they've suffered a major, major loss. So it's happening in great enough numbers for conversations like this to be happening among Ethiopian students, because you have a sister, you have a cousin, you know. So I don't know if you're familiar with that, but again, it's Africa. It's in a lot of places of Africa, not just Ethiopia. But the way that the Protestants are being perceived in those countries is very interesting.
You're always, and this is a comment about Ethiopia being sort of a target for evangelicals, and it's splitting families because the evangelical culture is replacing the familial and host culture. So is that not like a cultural assault? You see that with Mormons, all the groups that are missionizing groups, Jehovah's Witnesses. So I would say that's very sad. I hear a lot of loss and sadness in your comment. But I think that's also very normal. When a culture so captures you, you're investing sort of all your eggs in that basket, your psychological eggs, belonging, identity, meaning, and purpose is coming from that group now. And loss, things change. Family allegiances break down and weaken. It is sad, but it's very normal when people adopt a new faith or even convert after they marry someone. And it's, I don't think religions see the downside of that. I don't think they address the suffering. They think they're only doing good things or saving this soul for the afterlife. They don't see the other side of that. Comments? Contributions? In the back. And then Ginger.
Two very different things. Number one, when the Soviet Union crumbled and all of those countries regained their freedom, the missionaries from the West, particularly from the United States, were the first to arrive. And that created lots of displacement in the same way. So it was really amazing what branches of what you have where. So the zeal, the energy of particularly Christian religions to come in and convert or save is quite strong. And the second thing, totally different. This BIMP, your BIMP example, it strikes me that this is the very same thing that draws young people into gangs. This is exactly the parallel, and the same recruiting model happens because you're looking for youth that are displaced or alone or feeling ostracized or whatever. And it is a harder payment, but the same.
Comment about the Soviet Union's collapse and states that are set free from Soviet control and became a target for evangelizers from Christianity. I also have to say those Christians are doing exactly what they should be doing. In their system, Jesus told them to go and make disciples of all nations. And the religions that are dying, Lutheran, Episcopal, don't do that. They're too nice. They don't want to upset anybody or overpower anybody's boundaries. Let them believe what they believe in. Well, they're dying. So I understand, but they're doing what their salvation is at stake for them. Not that I want them aiming at me or mine, but excellent point about gangs. That gangs are what is offered is belonging and an identity, symbols, meaning and purpose. Yeah, if religion can't deliver that, it's going to die out, and other groups will provide it. Yeah, Ginger.
Yeah, I was wondering when you're having conversations with people who are deeply religious about truth, and you pose this question, who cares? The level of resistance that you get to that, because I imagine it might make people feel like their faith is under attack or being undermined in some way.
Yeah, I don't put it that way. I say, can you explain to someone who might not care? So in interviews, I am on the side of the interviewee. And I will ask some provocative questions, because that's just seeing how they react is so insightful. Are they going to get rigid and agitated and triggered, or are they going to think about that a little? So I don't put it that way, who cares? But if they can't, when I'm sure you're in graduate school, you're encouraged to have that elevator minute. If you're in it, get on an elevator and somebody says, what's your dissertation about? You've got 1 minute to deliver your message. If they can't deliver their message in a clear, comprehensive way in just a short blurb, they need to work on it. So they need to, if they're going to sell it, so the rest of us understand it, the interviewer that's asking, they need to step up their communication game. Let me do section 3, and then we can have our refreshments. This is the issue. Again, religions are tricky systems, morality, that nice, ouchy area of morality. How do religions contribute to conversations about morality that are not based in shame? Once upon a time, there was an old farmer who had worked his crops for many years. One day, his horse ran away. Upon hearing the news, the neighbors came to visit. "Oh, such bad luck," they said. "Maybe," said the farmer. The next morning, the horse returned, bringing with it 3 wild horses. "How wonderful," the neighbors exclaimed. "Maybe," said the old farmer. The following day, his son tried to ride one of the untamed horses, was thrown off, and broke his leg. The neighbors again came to offer their sympathy and to cluck about his misfortune. "Maybe," said the farmer. The day after, military officials came to the village to draft young men into the army. Seeing that the son's leg was broken, they passed him by. The neighbors congratulated the farmer on how well things had turned out. "Maybe." So how do we live life doing a maybe? What is good or bad? And if we don't know that, how do we avoid moral anarchy? Every culture and every geopolitical region has its morality. Sometimes it's implicit, sometimes it's explicit, sometimes it has a consensus to it, sometimes it's imposed. But it's there. What's good? Let's list all the good things. What's bad? Let's list all the bad things. But if we don't know good from bad, how do we avoid moral anarchy? One of the functions religion performs is this clarification of morality. This clarification of morality. Sometimes religion is the preacher. Sometimes it's the absorber of modern morality. And sometimes it is sort of all by consensus in a culture. I'll give you an example. Hannah Arendt. How many people know that name? Hannah Arendt. German Jewish philosopher who had family lost in the Holocaust. She wrote a book called Eichmann in Jerusalem, The Banality of Evil. Banal, boring, so boring. How does she call evil boring? She sat in on the trial of Eichmann, one of the architects of the final solution during the Holocaust, after he had been captured in Argentina. She studied him for hours every day. She was shocked to find him so boring. When he was asked if he hated Jews, he said no. He had no disturbed hatred of Jews. He wanted to focus on his job and do his job really, really well. And so he had been put in charge of making Zyklon B, the gas used in gas chambers, more effective, and making the gas chambers more effective. And so he focused on that, and that's what his reports up the chain of command were about. It wasn't about the Jews. He had so dehumanized them in his mind, he was looking at the numbers. But in his culture, the morality of his culture, he was a success. He was a hero. How do you know, in the ethics of your time, whether you are on the side of the angels or the side of darkness? How do you know that? And so here's what Hannah Arendt says about moral compass. How do you recalibrate almost daily your moral compass? Here's her quote. Only the activity of thinking, constantly thinking, of questioning critically, can the individual awaken to how their individual moral values compare and contrast with those of society. Only by thinking, critically thinking. Thus, she continues, and this is the hope, one awakened person, just one, willing to accept societal criticism for nonconformity, and that's huge, willing to accept societal criticism for nonconformity can become the prophet of a cultural awakening to a moral madness and how to get out of it. Only thinking, the activity of thinking, of constantly comparing your individual morality with the morality of the society around you, can one awakened person awaken the rest of us to the moral madness around us and offer a path forward. So, religion is a consensus in negotiating morality of the culture. People put in, people take out. It isn't all, religion is about people. And how do we, maybe on the inside of a religion, maybe on the outside of a religion, how do we stay sane morally? How do we develop a moral compass? We stay thinking, we stay engaged, and we look for that one awakened person who is willing to name it and claim it and offer a path forward outward. Get behind that person. Get behind that person. So I'm going to close with another little piece of Hannah Arendt for you. We all have to form our own moral systems. We form our own moral systems. It's our job. It's our responsibility. We can't leave it to churches or synagogues, mosques or temples. It's on us to do the thinking. We embody our moral values. People watch us. Our children watch us. Our bosses watch us. We are accountable. We can withstand challenge in the service of our moral values. We can stand up for them. So we have to listen, we have to adapt, we have to claim our own truth, and be willing to put it out there and risk that social criticism that often comes. So, thank you.